After a painful loss in the wild card, the Minnesota Vikings have a lot to think about, including what is next for Sam Darnold. We're going to be talking about him, what the next contract for Sam Darnold could be, as well as what the offensive line needs to change for whoever the next Minnesota Vikings quarterback will be. We're going to talk about all of that here in this video. Before we get into it, though, we know that 91% of you guys watching right now are not subscribed to the channel. If you're looking for a spot to get all of your Minnesota Vikings news, you're in the right spot. Hit the sub button, join us here on the channel. We're covering everything Minnesota Vikings. But Griffen, this is my first video since the game, and we know your reaction, we've seen your reaction, but this was horrible. This was an absolutely terrible game. Sam Darnold, back-to-back duds ahead of what was going to be a massive contract year for him, and really the uncertainty of what was next for him now has a decent bit of certainty, I will say. But before we kind of hop into the whole discussion here, I want to pull up Sam Darnold's game log, and the top two are the most recent games against the Rams, against the Lions. But you can look at those and look at any other game, not against the Lions or the Rams, and we saw some consistency. We saw what we needed to see, at least the minimum, the bare minimum at least. And then we seen games Sam Darnold excel. We saw everything that needed to line up the way a Minnesota Vikings quarterback did. But in those games, against the Rams and against Detroit, Sam Darnold was pitiful. Now, you can't put the full blame on him. You can put quite a bit, and I certainly am. But the offensive line needs to take the bit of the blame here, too. And a lot of injuries there we're going to talk about in a bit. But Sam Darnold certainly lost quite a bit of money in this Rams game. Griffen, give me a price. What do you think he lost on that one? And we'll get over the market value as well here in a bit and kind of look at how that's going to change. But let me know what you think about this whole scenario right now.
Well, I think it cost him at least $10 million just for a starting point. I mean, Cinderella turned back into a pumpkin at the worst possible time, and it was exactly what we were fearing was going to happen. However, I'm happy that this did happen in a sense because now we can avoid Kirk Cousins 2.0. We don't have to worry about, okay, if Sam even got us to the NFC Championship game, do they pay him? Probably. He wins a Super Bowl or gets us to the Super Bowl, they 100% pay him. So if they paid him and we get more performances like we got the last 2 weeks, where are we there where we overpaid for a guy just like we did for Kirk Cousins and we can't get the right pieces around him where the pieces need to matter? Because when you have the right pieces around, it doesn't really matter who the quarterback is to an extent. Yes, the NFC is very barren as far as great quarterbacks. All the great quarterbacks are in the AFC. But when you look at the NFC teams, what are they built upon? Great defense, great offensive line, stellar weapons. We have the stellar weapons. We have a really good defense. We saw how they got exposed in some very critical parts in the last 2 weeks, so they have some things to shape up there. But the offensive line is the biggest thing, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But keeping it on Sam Darnold, when he doesn't have a perfect environment around him, he can't thrive. We need a quarterback who can thrive when things get rocky, when the pocket collapses, knowing when to step up, knowing when to take off and run, like he did in that one play in the third quarter where I'm watching going, where was this the entire first half when you were getting sacked, holding the ball for too long, and he had a wide open lane down the middle for at least 7 yards? I don't take that. We know you're not Lamar Jackson, but we know you can at least sneak and scramble when you need to. So there was a lot of things there where Sam didn't do everything he could to win us the game. He really kind of resorted back to the Sam Darnold that we saw in New York, in Carolina, and then we saw how he had a brief little one-game spotlight in San Francisco that kind of brought up his value. But a lot of people were saying the same thing that they say about Brock Purdy. He is a system quarterback. He's only as good as the system he's in. So, do they sign him to a contract? No. Do they sign him to a franchise tag? No. However, if they are foolish enough to do that, if they can make sure that somehow with that cap space left over to bolster down the offensive line, maybe we'll be okay. However, with the numbers that we're going to get into in a second, that is not going to be possible. So that's why they need to make the right decision, get rid of Sam Darnold, keep Danny Dimes in the quarterback room as a backup, because seeing what he can do for the past few years, I know it hasn't been all great, but we know that Danny Dimes, his ceiling is up here and his floor is down here. But if Kevin O'Connell can get him to stay at a consistent level, like we saw Sam Darnold do this year, where you have a quarterback who can scramble and run a bit more in those games where he might have to play if JJ goes down, or if JJ struggles, or if Danny Dimes just starts the season for us, then you have something there to work with. Whereas now we know what we've seen with Sam Darnold. And unfortunately, you got to go younger and you can't overpay.
Yeah, and we know Sam Darnold has legs. We've been able to see that before, not even just with the Vikings, not even just with the 49ers, but even when he was struggling with the Jets and with the Panthers, he'd have some nice run plays. And he is one of those scrambling quarterbacks that, like you said, not Lamar Jackson, but certainly has the legs to be able to create a play that was not originally there. And that's what we've seen, or well, that's what we didn't see him do in these most recent few games against the Lions and against the Rams. He was not going he wasn't breaking. He wasn't using his legs. He wasn't scrambling. He wasn't doing anything to create the opportunity. Every time that either would be a bad pass, he'd be sacked, the camera would cut to Kevin O'Connell immediately, and almost not putting the blame on him, but almost saying, look, this is a system quarterback. Kevin O'Connell, you're at fault here, even though he's absolutely not. The offensive line has had some issues with that as well, and you have to have time in the pocket to be able to throw the ball, and that's exactly what Sam Darnold didn't have, but he does have the legs to be able to negate that to a certain extent, especially over these past few games. But looking at Sam Darnold's market value currently, and I'm not sure if this is updated, and I don't think it is, and I hope it isn't, $40 million annual average salary. So I originally didn't want to count out Sam Darnold as a Vikings quarterback for maybe next season, but at this price, I certainly do. And as you mentioned, he certainly is going to get paid somewhere else. He does have that potential. He is a system quarterback, but if the system is right, just say a team, a few years ago, like Dallas would have been, where they have the right system, they just have that kind of zero luck style of playing, he would have been good, and obviously the Vikings had the great system, but they didn't have the best players to make that system work, and $40 million is obviously a major price tag, and it will be interesting to see if teams are going to be willing to pay that, even with seeing what he's done in the last two games against a Lions team that, let's say, I hate to say it, but are very good, a Rams team that is not as good, but just have a good pressure defense, and it's going to be interesting to see. And, I really don't know, and I don't even have a guess of what team would be willing to pay this price tag, but, there's going to be teams foolish enough out there to be able to make that happen. But, and looking at the depth chart as well, as you mentioned, Griffen, I do think Daniel Jones is one guy that needs to stay in this lineup. I do think that he needs to stay on this team, whether it is start next season over J.J. McCarthy, who's still maybe out due to injury, or if J.J. struggles, put Daniel Jones in, and he does have a very high ceiling. Daniel Jones was an excellent player to an extent. He has a lot of issues as well, though, but we saw what the quarterback whisperer Kevin O'Connell did to Sam Darnold, and I think Daniel Jones could even be a higher potential than what Sam Darnold brings, so it really is no issue of just keeping him, but Sam Darnold definitely should not be on this list next year. But one thing we mentioned as well was the offensive line. The offensive line was absolutely terrible, and goes back to this wildcard game. 9 sacks, which was a tied for an NFL playoff record for the Rams. Sam Darnold can't be to blame for the sacks. And obviously there are some that he could be, but not every single one. The ball could have got out a few times. He could have maybe made an extra, the run. He could have made the short pass, whether it is an incompletion or not. It's not a sack. And the way that the game was managed near the end as well, holding the ball, taking it slow when you're in crunch time, you need to run that ball. You need to throw that ball. You cannot afford to hold on to it. Take your time after any play. But going back to the offensive line as well, and I know I'll get to you here in a minute, Griffen. This offensive line was not healthy. Christian Darrisaw, of course, out. Brian O'Neill left the game. The interior offensive line was not the greatest here. There were a lot of issues that are going to need to be addressed for next season, and whether or not that will be at the draft, whether or not that will be in free agency, whether or not, Darrisaw will be healthy to start next season, which apparently, from what we're seeing, he might not be. That'll be an absence of Cam Robinson as well, who is a free agent. So there's going to be a lot to think about here going forward for the Vikings. So let me know what you think about Griffen, what do you think about the offensive line here, as well as the price tag for Sam Darnold, kind of just as we pulled that $40 million up.
They kind of go hand in hand, to be honest, because if you pay Sam Darnold, you're not going to be able to get the offensive line pieces you need, especially if Christian Darrisaw is out next season. When he went down in that first Rams game, you and I were even talking about it. I said our season's over, and you were a bit more optimistic about it, but we know how valuable he is to this team. Even in the Vikings video we did yesterday, the Vikings fan Logan that I met, he was saying Darrisaw is one of his favorites. Lots of people love this guy, and for a reason, because he's one of the best left guards in football. Now, with that, you have Sam Darnold's price tag, where if he's not staying on the Vikings, I can guarantee you he's going to go to an NFC team, because the NFC loves to overpay quarterbacks that aren't worth it. We've seen it with Sam Darnold, unfortunately, where he's going to go, Kirk Cousins. Baker Mayfield's making that price tag, but Geno Smith, he got a big extension, hasn't really followed through on that. lots of other guys have been getting extensions or big contracts in the NFC, and they can't fulfill it. So Minnesota needs to be very wary not to do that again like they did with Kirk Cousins. So with that too, you have a rookie quarterback, or who will be a rookie kind of a rookie quarterback in his second year, in JJ McCarthy, where you're going to have him on a rookie deal. You can save a lot more money. And what you can do with that is go and get McCarthy a great offensive line to protect him, because like we've seen with Bryce Young, JJ McCarthy, he's not the biggest guy. Bryce Young wasn't the biggest guy. Bryce Young's playing really good now. He beefed up in the offseason heading into this season, had a lot of struggles, but he really found his momentum in the last part of this season. So JJ McCarthy, you want to avoid that completely. He's going to probably bulk up in the offseason. I know he's recovering from that injury. However, if he hasn't really gotten into that beefy quarterback that we've seen smaller guys turn into over the course of their career, you need to make sure that his ass is protected as much as possible, especially if Darrisaw isn't back. Cam Robinson's going to be gone. I know he had a lot of offensive flags and a lot of struggles, but that was just jumping into a new system. But go out, draft one of these offensive linemen that can be really high value, or go out and get a guy in free agency, because you don't sign Sam Darnold, you have an extra $40 million at least to work with as far as getting better offensive linemen, a better pass rushers on defense. Not saying our pass rushers are bad, but Pat Jones went down. That was a big blow. Jonathan Grenard, he's been great. Dallas Turner, he was an awesome rookie. Can't wait to see more of him. But we still have some gaps either in the front seven or even in the secondary. I know our secondary was great this season. Our linebackers were really good. But when we have injuries pop up, we don't have those next man up guys that can really fill in the way they need to. They can for a game or two, but if you have a guy going on IR, it's going to be tough for that replacement to maintain it over a stretch of at least 4 games. So Minnesota needs to be very, 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 very careful here with not signing Sam Darnold. I know we were really high on him all season. We sang his praises all year. But when you have a second to kind of look back at the season we had, we only beat 3 playoff teams. And the only losses we had this season were to the same 2 teams. And there was a lot of things on defense to blame for that, but there was equally as much on offense to blame for that as well, where against these teams, we couldn't move the ball at all. Whether through the air or through the ground, we couldn't move the ball. We couldn't get our quarterback time to get the ball out. And we weren't able to stop a crazy pass rush from those players. So what do you have to do to rectify that? Hey, why not actually fix the problem instead of saying, you know what, that could be a problem, but it's always going to be the quarterback. Quarterback's the center of it. It is not the case. You need to go out and make sure that his offensive line is protected, because we've seen, even with quarterbacks who aren't the greatest or aren't even a top 10 quarterback, they can play like one when they have the right offensive line there.
Yeah, the Vikings are going to have a lot of moves to make this offseason, including quarterback and offensive line, but I really think that we discussed what the most important thing is going to be in this offseason, from what we've seen this season especially. So whether or not it is Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, JJ McCarthy, maybe someone that we have never even thought of or never even heard of, be at the quarterback for the Vikings next season, we have a lot of moves to make before we actually find any success to where we want to end up, and that is, of course, the Super Bowl. So let us know what you think in the comments below. A lot of moves are coming. You're not going to want to miss what we have to bring you, but make sure to hit the sub button if you haven't already. But that's all we got in this video. If you did enjoy, give it a like, hit the sub button as well. We're signing out. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day. See you later.